Lead Time is a podcast of the Unite Leadership Collective, hosted by Tim Allman and Jack Caliberg. Lead Time taps into biblical wisdom for practical solutions to today's burning issues. Each podcast confronts real-time struggles facing the local church in a post-Christian culture. Step into the action with the ULC at uniteleadership.org. This is Lead Time.
Hey, pastor, church leader, are you ever frustrated because you've got leaders in your world, and if they're going to be discipled, you feel like you have to send them somewhere else, maybe to one of our Concordias if you're in a Lutheran tradition, or even to the seminary? The Kairos University platform, in partnership with the Luther House of Studies, is for you. You guys all know that I'm a pastor at Christ Greenfield, and we have a small seminary program going on right now. Now, you may be saying, well, they should be sent to the institutions. I'm telling you, all of these leaders simply want to serve, most of them bivocationally, in our local context. And so the Luther House of Studies, in partnership with the Kairos University platform, is a wonderful, wonderful option for us at Christ Greenfield, and it is one of the key partners in the Unite Leadership Collective. Simply go to uniteleadership.org to find out more, and we cannot wait to certify shepherds, evangelists, executive directors, counselors, commissioning them for ministry to seek and save the lost in your local community. uniteleadership.org.
Welcome to Lead Time. Tim Allman here with Jack Caliberg. Today we have the beautiful honor to get to know one of my new friends, Todd Peperkorn, 20 plus years as a parish pastor, and is now serving at Concordia Theological Seminary in Fort Wayne, which is the alma mater, you may not know, Todd, of my dad, Reverend Dave Allman, who's retiring this year. He loved his time in the early 80s. And there's some context we could get into as to why he went to Concordia Theological Seminary instead of St. Louis at that point. But it's going to be a lot of fun, Todd, to hang out today. We are going to go deep in a lot of topics regarding leadership development, the future of the church, and the role of institutions in raising up the next generation of leaders within our church. So give us a little bit of your story there, Todd.
Great. Absolutely. Thanks, Tim. This is wonderful, and I love having the conversation. As you said, my name's Todd Peperkorn. I serve as an assistant professor in the pastoral ministry and mission department here, which is kind of the long way of saying the practical department. I teach counseling and preaching primarily, and then do field ed, and I'm the director of vicarage here. So that's kind of my day job, so to speak, that I've been slowly learning the ropes on for the last year. Prior to that, I was a pastor for 10 years in Northern California, Holy Cross Lutheran Church in Rockland. And then before that, I was a pastor at Messiah Lutheran Church in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which is kind of southeast Wisconsin. And so I've been involved as a pastor and kind of leadership in 2 or 3 different districts, and served on the Board of Regents at our sister seminary in St. Louis for about 6 years. So that was kind of an exciting ride. And here we are. So I'm kind of learning new things every day. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's very unique. And I've had a lot of friends that have done both the parish ministry role and then transitioned into one of our maybe universities or one of our 2 seminaries. What's been the hardest switch going from church life into kind of administrative role within our seminary?
That's a hardest, honestly, is Sunday morning. I love being a parish pastor. I love preaching. I love being there, not only in kind of in church, but also teaching Bible class and kind of, I'll say connect with people on earth. and in the realities that we live in, and kind of all of the messiness and contradiction and everything that we live in. And that's been strange to kind of sitting in the pew is really weird for me on Sunday mornings. And I expect it will be for a while, but it's also been good because I've found that, I'm still a pastor. I still do what I do. That, who I am has been shaped over many decades, and that it doesn't just kind of turn off.
No.
And being a pastor to the students here and to the staff, and kind of seeing myself in that role, I think is kind of why God led me to this place to begin with. This is why I'm here.
Yeah.
And it's been, it's good, but it is different. No doubt about that.
Yeah. No. Thank you for.
I miss my people.
Thank you for
That's
your
really
leadership.
the bottom line.
Mary and bearing and baptizing and those kind of being there in people's lowest and highest moments. And we just kind of, Todd, as pastors, we just kind of get inserted. Obviously, you know your people, you love your people, but some of them you know better than others. And yet the holiness of entering into those high and low moments and bringing the gospel, it's something that I have and never want to again take for granted. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Yeah.
And you would think in some ways that it's those crisis moments, the family in crisis, the situation that is the absolute worst. Those are actually the best times being a pastor, because it's kind of like everything all sort of coalesces into, all right, so now I can serve Christ both as the hearer, as the one kind of listening and receiving all of this pain and hardship and trials, but then also speak Christ to these people and give a word of hope when they're certainly not getting it anywhere else. Yeah. And that's kind of, I think that's one of the big things that is such an interesting challenge today, is how do you actually bring hope to people in a world of just relentless negativity? It's overpowering sometimes.
It's interesting you say that, Todd, because I agree with you. That's the time I think where people are they're looking for answers in these times of crisis. And just like you said, society doesn't have it, or the ones the answers that they have are very shallow. They don't really bring comfort. And so it's interesting that you bring out that is like, that's the best time of ministry, I think, because that's a time where people's ears are most open to hearing the gospel.
Yeah. And Lutherans, in my view at least, Lutherans are most comfortable. We are most ourselves in the middle of paradox and mess upness. That's when our theology of the cross, that's when our kind of identity as Christians really shines the most. And so kind of recognizing that, and that doesn't mean that it's not the case at other times and at other places, but I know that for just in kind of talking with guys around here, it's one of the big things that I kind of try to highlight is those aren't the times that you want to get away from so that you can go, hide in your study and read. And, I am a reader. Well, that's what I do. But rather, those are the times when you need to be the fireman running toward the fire, not the other way.
Yeah. Todd, for anybody who's watching that might not be as familiar with the paradoxes we talk about, what are some examples of these paradoxes that we lean into?
Well, sure. Well, I love the language of hidden and revealed. That God hides himself in order to reveal himself. And it's that hidden and revealing that is such a beautiful thing, that God hides himself in the most unlikely of places, in suffering, in hardship. He uses poor miserable sinners, like we say in the liturgy. He uses us to do his work. And it's precisely when we think that all is lost and when everything is a disaster that God's kind of like, oh, okay, well, now that you've recognized that you can't actually do this, maybe I can get involved.
Yeah, that's
and
so good.
And I think that's a beautiful picture
really is.
of the Christian life.
And it's what people need right now. I think, Todd, our theology is primed for the chaos our world is walking through right now. If we have looked to the world, to the government, to our economic whatever to like provide us hope, things are going up and to the right. Nah, like the Bible is very clear. It's down and to the left. It gets worse before it gets better, you know. And this is this is a great moment to be a Lutheran Christian united, bringing the greatest story of all time. So one of our biggest frustrations is that we have this spectrum, and I don't really like talking this way within the LCMS, and I'm frankly confused about it, but we love to kind of nitpick at one another within our church body around using different words on confessional or missional spectrum. We're all confessional, we're all missional, and it seems like we're in this kind of echo chamber moment within our church body that's I think Satan is using it as a ploy to keep us from uniting, John 17, to go on mission, to bring our awesome gospel to a variety of different contexts. Is it just us who kind of look at our synod and say, we may be trending and we need to repent of this. We may be trending right along with the political polarization of this day and age, and it's not helping advance the gospel, the cause of Christ. Thoughts on that, Todd?
Oh, so many thoughts. I did my doctorate in preaching at a Roman Catholic school, Aquinas Institute of Theology in St. Louis.
Nice.
And I intentionally did it because I didn't want to have another degree from a school named Concordia. I had 3. That's enough. Let's go for a different word. And I learned a ton in that 5 years. And I have some dear friends that are Roman Catholic brothers and sisters. A part of what I learned in that process is, one, we aren't the challenges that we face aren't nearly as dramatic and different as we might think. The spectrum of change in the Missouri Synod, we act as if using, setting 1 versus setting 3 versus setting 4 is somehow this enormous gap, never mind contemporary worship and everything else, when all of it kind of put together is still one tiny little sliver in Christianity. And, I think of St. Paul's words in Ephesians 4 of eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. What does that eagerness actually means? That we need to be oriented toward each other and that unity, so that we can then serve the world. And if I don't treasure that unity, if I'm not eager toward it, then what am I doing? Yeah. And I don't mean that to minimize any theological, real theological differences and stuff. But at the same time, I've got to learn how to look at my brothers and sisters in Christ as brothers and sisters in Christ, and not as the competition or the enemy. And I mean, and a part of that too is our American culture, I believe, makes it so that we are kind of built to be competitive. We are built to see each other, and by each other I mean congregations, to see the church down the road as this is the competition. This is, are the new transfers that are going to come from some other LCMS church, right? This is the competing team where we're competing for a teeny tiny little sliver of resources and utterly ignoring the very neighborhoods that our congregations are in. And not actually seeing us as being partners in the gospel. That is a tragedy of the highest level.
What part of that American ethos is driving that? I agree, but I'm having a hard time articulating where that comes from.
I here's the best description that I've had of it, and you guys can tell me if this makes sense. Are you familiar with Terry Mattingly? Does that name ring a bell? Mm-hmm. Terry Mattingly is a layman. He's actually Eastern Orthodox, and he writes for a website called GetReligion.org.
Okay.
He's been a kind of a media observer and media reporter for 30 years, something like that. Terry Mattingly talks about how in 1900, if you were going to get in a time machine, get in your TARDIS and go to 1900 New York City, you would find that there are 100 daily newspapers in New York City. And basically every neighborhood has their own newspaper. They've got newspapers for left-handed Ashkenazi German Jews and right-handed Sephardic German Jews. And every little minutia kind of goes down there. And you knew that when you picked up the left-handed Ashkenazi German Jew newspaper, that's what you were getting. Yeah. But you could also open your front door and you could actually talk to your neighbor as well. As the media in our kind of expanded into mass media, so the ability to publish and the ability to do these things on a larger scale became more and more common, the ability to kind of say, this is my unique perspective, actually disappeared toward objectivity. I'll call it the Walter Cronkite effect. So that now you have one perspective, or, when I was growing up, you had 3 stations on the TV. And then there was the newcomer Fox, but you had ABC, NBC, and CBS. And that was the truth. It was either Walter Cronkite or Dan Rather.
And they're curating the truth for you.
Right. And they're curating the truth. But there is a sense, a kind of a unification, a sense. And whether this is in some ways it really is a dream, a fantasy. Mm-hmm. But there is a sense that this is reality. And then comes the internet. And the internet blows the entire thing to smithereens. So now you don't have 100 daily newspapers. You have each individual has their own newspaper called their Facebook stream. And it is unique to them. Where now the things that they're getting fed aren't just for the left-handed Ashkenazi German Jew, but it is, what are the things that I can give to this person so that they're going to buy more things?
Yeah.
What are the things that I can give to this person so that they will keep looking?
Well, and I think it goes even further than that, because in the online world, these algorithms, the AI that designs these algorithms, it learns you specifically what gets you triggered. So either triggered in a positive way, but more often triggered in a negative way.
Exactly. So that now when I see something that doesn't fit my personal algorithm, essentially, now the way that I treat them is I dehumanize them. I put them in a category. I can give them a label, essentially drop kind of little hand grenades at each other. And then so that I don't have to actually talk to this person or deal with this person, I can now write them off without ever interacting with them at all.
Yeah.
And that's kind of American society.
So this is fascinating, because I've reflected on multiple instances where somebody will post a comment or say something online that I know they would never in 1,000 years say to my face.
Exactly.
And this is somebody I know, and at some point I'm going to have to see this person again face to face.
Right. And you kind of want to call the person and say, "Can we actually talk about this?" But the very way that we are learning to communicate day to day is shaping how we think about one another. And so that now the 8th commandment doesn't apply as long as I'm on my computer or whatever it might be. And I am kind of fascinated and terrified by this, and really have to continue to ask the question, so how do we be church in this? And of course, COVID just took all of this and ramped it up to 11.
Sure did.
Right.
So that we were forced to use this almost exclusively as means of communication. And I don't think that we really learned anything. Well, I think we've learned a lot. I'm not certain yet if we're going to actually put anything in practice that's going to be helpful.
That's so good.
I think that remains to be seen.
No, it's a crossroads right now, Todd, I feel, for the American church and even for the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And will we model as leaders within the church civil, kind, caring, hospitable conversation around our differences that are mostly sociological, I would make the argument, and there's some deep theology, but at least holding our thoughts around ministry in our context with an open hand. It's not surprising to you, Todd. I mean, we've been pushing here within we live in a rapidly growing community here in the East Valley of Phoenix. And local lay leadership development all the way up to vocational and bivocational leaders. And some of our videos and some things that we've written could be interpreted as antagonistic. That's not our desire at all. We're simply desiring to speak the truth in love and then get good feedback. But the struggle for us has been folks who have a difference of opinion, and we're going to go deep into, we're going to maybe have some conversation around things we disagree on, and that's great. But folks don't reach out and have a civil conversation privately with us if they've got an issue. Right. We know that folks are talking about, and I've seen it in print, local leadership development, but like no one's reached out and actually heard our story and actually gotten to know, because I and Jack, we're very conservative Lutherans that are also very realistic and we're pragmatists in just saying there is a major leadership development gap right now. Yeah, go ahead, Jack.
Right. So entrepreneurial and, like you said, very conservative. Like we don't see us diverging from the confessions in any way, or adopting any trendy cultural issues. We are innovating in the space of leadership development. That's probably the one way that you'd say, this is an area where we're being innovative. So does that cause us to be labeled as liberals, right? That's the part I think that's been puzzling to me in hearing some of these comments.
Yeah. And of course, terms like, and I've argued for a very, very long time that terms like liberal and conservative are very convenient ways of essentially shutting down conversation.
Right. Yes.
If I can say that you're a liberal or a church growther, or that you're a liturgical Nazi, or you pick whatever the moniker is, all that does is that works to say, okay, I've got this person categorized. I know what they're going to say. I know what they're going to do. I don't have to actually talk to them anymore.
Yeah. And
I'm sorry, I don't buy it. I just don't buy it.
There's a great presentation at our local pastors conference. What was the presenter's name, Tim? So we credit him properly, but he talked about the pendulum.
Yeah. I'll pull it in a sec, but talk about the pendulum. I'd love to get Todd's.
We'll remember it.
Yeah, Todd's comments on the pendulum.
This pendulum. He gave this image of this pendulum, and just saying, hey, you could imagine a congregation or a community being somewhere on this pendulum, and on one side of the pendulum is orthodoxy, and the other side of the pendulum is innovation. And I think he did a great job saying that orthodoxy and innovation are both really great things for the church, right? The problem is when you put your identity, like orthodoxy is just looking from the past and saying, this is what's worked from the past, so we're just going to repeat it because it's proven to work in the past. That's all orthodoxy ultimately is.
Sure.
Innovation is, let's find a new way to tackle new problems that our orthodoxy doesn't help us with, right? So ideally, I would say a culturally healthy organization could float very easily in there and say, let's learn what we've learned from the past. Let's lean into new areas. When you start to get rigid in one of those areas, though, the rigid community that leans into orthodoxy becomes legalistic. The one that hyper focuses on innovation can become heretics, honestly, because they start to value the innovation above the actual timeless story of the gospel, right? So there is a warning.
That's interesting.
Yeah, there is a cautionary sort of flag that exists on both sides. And what I would love to see for our local church, Christ Greenfield, but also the wider body, the LCMS, is that we get to fully own this space of orthodoxy and innovation, and
recognize it.
Yeah, exactly.
I have it's interesting. I like that picture. There's a lot of interesting things with it. I have heard a similar picture. The name of the woman that's used it. She was a teacher at Luther Seminary in St. Paul for a year. Grindal, I think, was her name. And she's and the kind of the two sides that she talked about were orthodoxy and pietism, and that orthodoxy, when it kind of goes bad, becomes brittle and hard and inflexible, and pietism, when it goes bad, becomes mushy and malleable like a fruit that is overripe.
Interesting.
And you can kind of see both sides to that. And her point wasn't one good, the other bad. The point is, okay, so how do I see myself in this world, in this pendulum, where I'm being faithful to what has been handed down to me, but at the same time recognizing I am not in the 16th century or the 2nd century or the 20th century even. But I am here now. And so what does faithful here and now look like? And I don't know, for me, I've had this conversation about leadership we talked about this a lot when I was on the board at Concordia Seminary. We talked about it all the time when I was a pastor in Northern California, where, and I'm going to guess that I was in the Sacramento area, and I'm going to guess that kind of the religious landscape there was probably similar to Phoenix. So you have a lot of growth, a lot of kind of big explosion, but a lot of massive demographic shifts happening so quickly that congregations it feels like congregations can turn around and their entire neighborhood has changed. And they never even noticed that it happened until it's already done.
Right.
And so we ended up in our Winkles and with the pastors that I hung out with there, talking a ton about how do we foster leadership in these congregations so that there's a continuity of leadership in the congregation, regardless of who the pastor is, and that you've got the pastor coming in with kind of theological perspective that will learn about the leadership and the needs at that place, and you have the local leadership coming in with I'll say a contextual perspective or something like that. That will be shaped by the theological formation the pastors have. And it's got to be both. And if you only have one, you're kind of toast.
Yeah.
And we have valued in the Missouri Synod, we have valued the theological orthodoxy to the point where the rest is irrelevant or seems irrelevant in comparison. And from my perspective, that's been a part of the challenge that we're facing from the highest institutions in the Missouri Synod, our schools, our all the way down to how do I run this preschool or whatever it might be. It is the same challenge, top to bottom.
That's fascinating. So, Todd, at the ULC, we talk about when we describe building spiritual leaders, replicating spiritual leaders, we take that phrase and we break it into two: spiritual and then leader, right? And I think anybody in their mind can think of somebody who's been a good leader, or let's say is good at leading people, but they're not very spiritual, right? And vice versa. We can imagine in our mind, we probably know people very spiritual, but I wouldn't want them to be leading because they haven't been prepared for that. So now when we think about doing development of people, developing spiritual leaders, now we have kind of two very important tracks that you can develop on: spiritual, faith, theology, right? Leadership. Can you run a meeting? Can you have a difficult conversation with a subordinate? Can you put together a budget, right? Can you run a project?
Can you fire somebody and have them thank you for it afterwards? Because it was the right thing. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's a big thing. And I'll even go another step and say, this is where the contextual models and the immersive models, let's kind of take those two. They need to learn from each other.
Yeah.
And honestly, this is kind of this is my world. Is I teach second year field education. Okay. So I'm the kind of the link between all of the classroom stuff and what actually happens in their congregations in their second year, preparing for vicarage, and then vicarage, which is the contextual element to kind of traditional pastoral formation in the Missouri Synod.
Yes.
And we are virtually the only church body that has a year-long contextual internship that is contextually immersive. That's how I would put it. We're it. And that's a part of the weirdness of comparing how we've done things historically in the Missouri Synod and how Fuller or Princeton or Duke or many of these other places do it is they don't have that both and.
Yeah.
They've got either or.
So what's the product of that?
So either.
I mean,
well, that's the question.
When they don't have that, right? What do you think?
Well,
is the product?
What I think happens is if it's all contextual and there isn't an immersive experience, the formation is going to be too localized, or has the danger of becoming too localized, so that they can't see the broader kind of the broader sweep and shape of the church. So that's kind of a danger on one end. The positive on one end is that it actually happens on earth and it actually happens with real people, and you're dealing with concrete inductive learning that actually can move to understand greater principles, kind of larger pictures. So that is an absolutely critical element to it. On the other hand, if it's all immersive, then you're simply then that quickly becomes entirely cognitive. That it simply becomes a matter of information. And I'm going to get the information, and then I'm going to give you the information. And now that I have, downloaded everything into your brain, now everything is fine.
Yeah.
And we're not computers. Yeah. Right. That's not actually how human beings function. But that is the danger of a purely, I'll say, a purely academic immersive experience.
Yeah. No, this is great.
And that has been kind of the predominant LCMS model for a long, long time.
And we're
it's not the only model.
Yeah, it isn't.
But it's the predominant
and
one.
And we're kind of wondering, in this day and age, and we can kind of agree, we're in a firmly post-Christian, postmodern, secular, whatever day and age, as to if we shouldn't be exploring leveraging the immersive, the content, the wider breadth model to more bivocational leaders. I've been blessed to have vicars that have gone through every different pathway right now. I'm teaching at the cross-cultural ministry program this next week with Jack out of Concordia Irvine. And obviously we've had SMP pastors. We have one currently. And then obviously our residential guys that come through every year. And we're just kind of wondering, as we have a vision for 20 campuses in 20 years at Christ Greenfield, and small, centrally supported, but smaller communities that can be one pastor and maybe an executive director or campus director can really steward the discipleship growth within that respective community. But it's hard for us right now, given the narrow models, to see a way that, hey, we could identify, discover, develop, and then deploy a leader given our current model. SMP is seen as second rate, and SMP is the closest thing we have toward raising someone up in the immersive and then contextual experience that we have right now. I'm frustrated that it's not a degree. And some of our students, we've seen it, they're frustrated it's not a degree. And so we've been exploring with this competence-based theological education, fully accredited through Kairos University, that it's more of a platform, Todd, that then you can put your respective theological teachings onto. You can bring all of your best content experts onto that platform. But we have been, and I think still are, kind of reluctant to explore models that are slightly, and you may say slightly imbalanced toward the contextual, but recognizing that where the rubber hits the road is going to be at the contextual local level. And it feels like we're trying to do two things at one time, but we're imbalanced toward institutional preservation. And that may be at the expense of congregations like ours that want to go on mission to raise up our own leaders and keep them here. And at the same time, Todd, I really value immersion within the wider church. Like, this is not just for you. We would love that a number of these leaders, if it didn't make sense for them to stay with us, that they were recognized as a general pastor within the wider church, so they could be sent. So yeah, we just find ourselves at a very interesting time, and I don't think our 4-year residential with the 1-year immersive experience fully scratches the itch of the bivocational need that a lot of our especially smaller churches need right now. Thoughts on that?
I would go a step further, Tim, and say it can't. And the reason that it can't, I mean, we can kind of, there might be some, I'll say some formation questions that are worth exploring, and we should do that, no doubt. But a part of it is a very, very concrete thing, is that you cannot expect a man to pick up and move, and then move again, and then move again, and then move again, only to come back and then have to return to his previous field and then do what he had done for 4 years part-time.
Maybe.
That makes right, maybe. Precisely. That makes absolutely no sense. I just don't buy that residential seminary formation is going to lead to bivocational ministry. Yeah. I don't think it's designed to, and that doesn't fit what is actually possible for this kind of leadership. So the question in my mind then, and I'm purely thinking out loud here. This is Todd thinking out loud. This is no policy anybody from anything. This is just me. That makes me raise the question of, okay then, so if that's kind of where we're at, what is possible in the model that you laid out, and you called it an executive director model. The model that we were tossing around in Sacramento area was a cathedral model, where you would, but you can kind of see a lot of the same things, where you have an executive director that oversees the entirety, and then you have deacons or whatever you want to call them in more local places, and maybe that means you're kind of doing a circuit rider thing. I don't know. That's what we were spending a lot of our time talking about. thinking about Tim Keller's book, Center Church, you've probably read that.
Todd, I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example from a blog post I wrote because a couple months ago. It was specifically about what the church can learn from the military. I'm a military guy, right?
Yep.
So the question is, how does the Army or the Marines or the Navy raise up the majority of their officers? The majority of their officers are raised up in the ROTC programs, probably depending on the branch, 70 to 85% of their officers are raised up locally. The local university, while they're serving, so they're already serving as an enlisted person, so they're in the local context serving. They've got some experience. They get paid to go to a local university that's got a accredited, vetted local learning program. And so they get to be raised up as military officers in their local context. And that was actually the vision of starting the ROTC program. At the same time, as an Army guy, we have West Point. West Point is this fantastic, you could call it exclusive. It is exclusive. That's how they run it.
Sure.
But it is the gold standard, and it is a residential program, and you're committed to 4 or 5 years of being embedded in this national program where they kind of say, this is where we're putting all the best practices into. And it's a great, prestigious program. And it's different though, right? Because it's a different type of commitment. They're going after a different type of demographic. If the people they recruit for West Point generally are people they're going right. They either know they're going in there when they enlist, or they're grabbing them right out of boot camp because they say, oh yeah, this person's got incredible potential. Let's get them into West Point, right? But people who are transitioning, if I was a corporal or whatever, and I thought, I think I want to be an officer, ROTC is the way to go. And that's made available in any state, right? So there's incredible benefits to that type of a model because West Point can provide content and, let's say, quality assurances for the local ROTC model. The ROTC model vastly multiplies the leadership output for the Army, quadruples, quintuples it, whatever. It also, in a sense, it's centralized because it's military, but it's also decentralized. What if something strategically happened to West Point, right? Well, we still got leadership academies all over the country. So there's an incredible robustness to it. And then here's the other thing. While it is prestigious to graduate from West Point, they don't treat officers coming out of ROTC as secondhand officers. A lieutenant is a lieutenant, right? A captain is a captain, right? And many people who've served in ROTC have grown up the ranks to become chief of staff, or Secretary of Defense. Colin Powell was a graduate of ROTC.
Yeah, thoughts on
that.
So
your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's interesting, and I will spend some time thinking on that as a model because it's not one that I have explicitly thought of before. My initial thought is positive. Also recognizing some of the inherent challenges, and you mentioned let's call it quality assurance. So that's going to be one thing. Another question that I would have is the capacity of the local, whatever the local units are. Okay, capacity of local to replicate the immersive experience that happens, and maybe that's a part of the point is that it's not trying to replicate it. And so what are we losing? I think that would be one of my questions that I'd want to explore. Another one that we haven't talked about, and I know we're probably getting close to time here, but another one that we need to talk about at some point is how does the LCMS polity, which is largely modeled after the American political system, how does LCMS polity come into play with all of this?
Yep.
Because it most certainly does. And our polity, as is true in American politics. Our polity is designed to, or maybe designed is the wrong word, but it has the effect of always favoring incumbency by a long shot. And so our polity tends to be very change adverse. That's both its strength and its weakness. Right. And so because our polity kind of centers things like certification for ministry into two institutions, and the placement process into one institution, the Council of Presidents, that structure does not allow itself for this dual track that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Not as it stands.
No, that's exactly right.
And whether it could or should are other questions.
Yeah.
But
what we're hoping for is
interesting.
What we're hoping for is an opening up of the colloquy process.
Yeah. And that's going to be the question.
Yeah.
Is
as a short-term solution.
Yeah. And I think that really the question that needs to be asked, and we talked about it a little bit, but we haven't talked about it a lot, is because this is the question that the church, more broadly speaking, I think is going to want to know is what are we gaining by the immersive experience? What are we gaining by the contextual experience? And how do we equate those two? And because that really is the question. In my mind. Now, as I'm talking to you guys and kind of hear this, what you're trying to answer, that is, how do I create 20 small churches that kind of serve as satellites of the main, where the leadership in these smaller churches are largely bivocational? That is a question that our structure is not designed to answer.
Right.
Which is why we're talking.
Exactly.
I'm guessing.
Exactly. And it's going to require, Todd, a lot more conversation with folks who are at the highest level of leadership down to the grassroots. I'm just a local parish guy trying to be faithful in my context. Jack is helping toward that end. And you're kind of, Todd, in your role, kind of a bridge because of your story as well as your role right now. And we're going to have you back on, Todd, because we barely scratched the surface on some of these conversations. But
this is fun.
This is a lot of fun. Yeah, we are hoping to have many, many more of these conversations on Lead Time, and just ask the question and then try to answer it with love and respect and build trust and build bridges of love and care within our small little spectrum. We are all very, very conservative. We love Jesus. We love his word. We want to go on mission to make him known. And we believe that the way we handle paradox, the tension points of theology, is exactly what the world needs. So, hey, Todd, thank you for your time and for your leadership within the local and wider church. And you are a blessing, buddy. And it's a privilege to call you a friend. Hey, sharing is caring. Lead Time listener, thanks for joining us today. Jack, you did a great job. And we will be back next week with a brand new episode. Peace of the Lord go with you. God bless.
You've been listening to Lead Time, a podcast of the Unite Leadership Collective. The ULC consults and brings together cohorts of congregations to build the culture, systems, and structures of intentional discipleship multiplication. To go deeper with us, create a free login on uniteleadership.org for access to exclusive materials and resources. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for next week's episode.